Okay, picture this. It's a Saturday afternoon back in the year 2000. A bunch of unsuspecting moviegoers in Chicago are just settling in for a matinee. Researchers hand them a free bucket of popcorn. Awesome, right? Well, there was a catch. This popcorn was absolutely awful. It had been popped 5 days earlier, and it was so incredibly stale that it literally squeaked when they chewed it. Some people got a medium bucket, and others got this massive large bucket that basically looked like an above-ground swimming pool. The researchers were trying to answer one really simple question. Would you actually eat more of this terrible, stale, squeaky popcorn just because you were handed a bigger bucket?
Well, the results are wild. They weighed those buckets before and after the movie, and the data was just undeniable. The folks with the massive buckets ate 53% more popcorn than the ones with the medium buckets. To put that into perspective, that's like 21 extra handfuls of totally gross, squeaky popcorn. And this just brilliantly highlights a huge flaw in how we think about human behavior. If we just looked at the raw numbers without knowing about the bucket sizes, we'd probably assume that people who ate way more were simply gluttons, right? Like they had a behavioral problem. But they weren't eating because it tasted good, and they definitely weren't hungry. The reality was just a simple equation. A bigger container equals more eating.
So, what does this all mean? It completely flips the script. If you're a public health expert looking at those so-called gluttons, your first instinct might be to educate them, right? Change their attitudes, give them a stern warning about health hazards. But if you literally just want them to eat less popcorn, the solution is right in front of us. Just give them smaller buckets. And that brings us to the first massive surprise about change. What looks like a people problem is actually very often just a situation problem.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are absolutely decoding the hidden mechanics of hard changes. We're basing this on the incredibly brilliant framework by Chip and Dan Heath from their book, Switch. We're going to completely dismantle how you view change. It doesn't matter if you're trying to help out a family member, pivot a massive global corporation, or just trying to finally stick to a healthier habit yourself.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for This Explainer. 1. The core metaphor. 2. Direct the writer. 3. Motivate the elephant. 4. Shape the path. And 5. Making the switch. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, the core metaphor, understanding the writer, the elephant, and the path.
Now, to really grasp why change either fails miserably or succeeds brilliantly, we first need to look at the psychological metaphor that anchors this whole framework. Our brain essentially has two independent systems working at the same time. First up, we have the writer. The writer is our logical, conscious side. This is a part of you that's fantastic at long-term planning, mapping things out, and providing clear direction. But the writer has a massive blind spot. They can get completely paralyzed by having too many options or too much ambiguity. They'll just sit there spinning their wheels, endlessly overanalyzing the situation.
But here's the thing. The writer isn't just walking along on their own 2 feet. They are perched right on top of a massive elephant. And the elephant? That represents our emotional, instinctive side. The elephant is the one doing the heavy lifting. It provides the energy, the drive, the loyalty. But the elephant is totally hungry for instant gratification. It wants a quick payoff. It wants that ice cream cone right now, today, rather than the better health a year from now.
So, here is absolutely the most crucial point. What happens when these two disagree? Say your writer wants to wake up at 5 a.m. to go for a jog, but your elephant just wants to stay wrapped up in a warm bed. Sure, the writer can tug on the reins and use willpower to force the elephant to get up for a day or two. But the writer is tiny compared to that massive elephant. In a tug of war, the writer is going to run out of strength fast. And the second the writer gets depleted, the elephant takes over. Meaning that thing we constantly label as laziness, it's actually just mental exhaustion from a really tired writer. But let's move to Section 2, direct the writer, providing crystal clear direction.
So, knowing that our writer has super limited energy, how do we help them stop overthinking and actually start moving? Well, because the writer loves to navel-gaze and spin their wheels, if they aren't completely sure which way to go, they'll literally lead the elephant in circles. When we see someone failing to change, we usually assume they're just digging their heels in. But what looks like defiant resistance is almost always just a lack of clarity. To fix this, you have to script the critical moves. Tell the writer exactly what to do.
One of the absolute best ways to give that crystal clear direction is to find what the authors call bright spots. There's this brilliant example of Jerry Sternin fighting child malnutrition in Vietnam. Now, instead of bringing in a bunch of outside textbook knowledge and triggering that defensive, not invented here skepticism, he just looked around for local solutions that were already working. He found these very poor local mothers whose kids were somehow perfectly healthy, and he studied exactly what they were doing differently. Turns out, they were feeding their kids tiny, daily portions of shrimp and sweet potato greens, stuff that was considered kind of low class by everyone else.
Sternin just gave the other mother's riders incredibly specific instructions on how to replicate those exact behaviors. By cloning what was already working locally, he directed the rider perfectly.
All right, Section 3, motivate the elephant, finding the feeling.
Okay, so we've got the rider pointed in the right direction, but just knowing something intellectually, nowhere near enough to actually cause change. To get that massive elephant moving, we have to find the feeling. Take a look at this quote. This captures a totally visceral reaction from an executive at a big manufacturing company. An employee there, John Stugner, figured out the company was bleeding money on disjointed purchasing. So what did he do? He gathered exactly 424 different types of gloves that the company was buying, and he tagged them with their wildly different prices, including the standard $5 glove that someone somehow managed to buy for $17. Then, he literally dumped this huge pile of gloves right onto the boardroom table in front of the executives. The visual was so shocking, it triggered this exact quote on the screen.
You see, Stegner knew a massive 12-tabbed analytical spreadsheet wasn't going to inspire anybody. If he just appealed to their rational riders, they'd probably nod, agree with him, and then put the project off until next year. You have to deliver an emotional jolt. Stegner's dramatic visual demonstration made them actually feel the absolute absurdity of their purchasing system. And that shock, that fired up the elephant. It created the instant, urgent motivation they needed to completely overhaul the whole system.
Moving right along to Section 4, shape the path, tweaking the environment.
So far, we've talked a lot about the person inside, the rider and the elephant. But honestly, sometimes the absolute easiest way to change behavior is just to smooth out the actual road they're walking on. First, tweak the environment to remove friction. You want to create a steep downhill slope that naturally pulls people in the right direction. Think back to shrinking those popcorn buckets. Second, build habits. When a behavior becomes an automatic habit, it's essentially free because it stops draining the rider's limited energy. And third, rally the herd. Humans are incredibly social creatures, and behavior is super contagious. Use that social pressure to your advantage.
Let's look at a quick case study to see it in action. There was a high school teacher who had two really challenging students. They constantly showed up late, sat in the back, disrupted the class, the whole shebang. The teacher tried the strict route, punishments, rules, trying to force their elephants into compliance, but it just wasn't working. To actually shape the path, he needed to zero in on the specific critical move, which was just getting those students into their seats before the bell rang. By tweaking the environment and shifting the established routines in the classroom, literally shaping the path itself, he was able to completely bypass their resistance.
Finally, Section 5, making the switch, bringing it all together.
Okay, we've broken down all the individual pieces. Now let's synthesize these amazing insights into a practical playbook you can actually use. For any hard change to succeed, whether it's getting your kids to finally clean up their rooms or shifting the culture of a massive multinational corporation, you have to consistently hit all three of these steps at the exact same time. You direct the rider by providing clarity and finding those bright spots. You motivate the elephant by sparking emotion and finding the feeling. And you shape the path by tweaking the environment to make it an easy downhill ride. If you neglect even one of these, your change is eventually going to stall out.
And as you look over this complete framework, just remember that real change is a continuous process. It's not a one-and-done event. There is no magical movie montage moment where a whole community completely reforms its habits overnight. It takes persistence. But if you apply this specific framework, you can systemically engineer success. And the best part? You can do it without needing a massive budget, and you don't even need formal authority to make it happen.
Throughout this explainer, we've seen how just a simple shift in perspective, really understanding that interplay between the rider, the elephant, and the path, can conquer obstacles that seem completely impossible. So now that you are armed with the tools to direct your rider, motivate your elephant, and shape your path, the only question left to ask yourself is this: what hard change are you going to tackle next?